And I just wanted to welcome everyone to this training. And we're so excited to have you all participating in our first ever really citizen science projects that we're doing through the museum. With us today, we have Sam Harrington and Claudia Sebastiani from ISeeChange. And we have Tim Armstrong he's from the National Weather Service, and he's also our regional coordinator for the CoCoRaHS program. We also have Max Cawley from Museum of Life and Science, and he has done a lot of citizen science in the past year plus, and he's kind of helping us navigate this process, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what Museum of Life and Science did. I mentioned earlier, this is being recorded, so if you're uncomfortable being on camera, feel free to turn your cameras off now. That's simply because this is a training that the people who were unable to come to this session will be able to watch later. At the end of this, once you've completed this training, we have our rain gauges at the museum that you'll be able to pick up. Unfortunately, they were back ordered, but we should have some by Tuesday. So from Wednesday on, because we're not exactly sure what time Tuesday, but from Wednesday on, you'll be able to come pick up rain gauges if you wanted to participate in the CoCoRaHS project. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to Max. He's going to tell us a little bit about what he has done with Life and Science. Then we'll hear a little bit from ISeeChange, and then we'll do the CoCoRaHS rain gauge training. All right.
Darcy, thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Really glad to be here. Thank you so much for making a little bit of time today for this really important training. So I am really excited to be here talking about citizen science related to climate change for a couple of reasons. One big one is that the projects that you're going to be learning about today and that we hope you'll participate in are actually incredibly useful for the creation of new knowledge that is really necessary for mitigating climate change and for building resilience against it here in North Carolina. Climate change here in North Carolina is complex, and that's because there are a lot of different ways that North Carolinians experience climate change. Earlier last year, the museum, along with a bunch of our partners, including our friends at ISeeChange, created a web series to talk a little bit more about how North Carolinians experience climate change. And there's a few reasons that we did this, but centrally, climate change looks really different depending on where you are in North Carolina. Here in Durham, my experience of climate change may be quite different than how you experience it in Wilmington, but you don't need to even live between different cities to see changes. A lot of the impacts of climate change vary from city block to city block and depend on things like how much impervious surface, like concrete, you live around, how many trees you live around, how well taken care of the infrastructure in your neighborhood is. There's a couple of reasons why citizen science and the materials that we put together we thought would be interesting to help support people participating in projects like this. What you're seeing here is a map from last year created by the Yale Program of Climate Change Communication that essentially asked people here in the USA, do you think climate change is happening? 72% of people said, yes, we think that climate change is happening. They asked them, are you worried about climate change? 63% of people in the US said that they're worried about climate change. Do you think climate change will harm you personally? 43% of people said yes. You're probably beginning to see a pattern. Unfortunately, this is not the last slide in this series. They asked, do you discuss climate change, global warming, at least occasionally? 35% of people said yes. It's really important that we as North Carolinians, but also as residents of the United States, talk about climate change because your experience with climate change matters an awful lot. And one reason that I think a lot of people may not discuss it often is that it's kind of hard to understand how we are specifically impacted by it, how you are living through climate change right now. So we developed a web series called Climate Conscious North Carolina that talked to North Carolinians that were either working in fields related to climate change, were practitioners in climate science, or were otherwise experts in climate here in North Carolina. And this varied from all across the state. Here in North Carolina, we experience extreme heat, extreme precipitation, sea level rise, and right now, much of the state is experiencing a flash drought, which is exactly the opposite of what we were experiencing last May. So we experience a lot of different types of effects of climate change, and we developed a short series with experts from across our state about these. I'm really excited that you all have an opportunity to experience these. We made a series of web videos about them that you can find on our YouTube channel. And we also made it into a podcast. It's kind of easy listening because we know that everybody is kind of tired of being in front of their computer screen and being on Zoom videos. These are all still up and available to you. And I hope that one thing that this helps to do to support your learning in this process is help to add a little bit of that additional context, because it's important when you're participating that you know the why of what you're doing along with the how. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about that from our friends at ISeeChange and at the National Weather Service and from Cape Fear. But I also hope that listening to all of these experts from a variety of different fields talk about how they think about climate change might be helpful to you too. Okay, that about does it for me. I'm really grateful for a little bit of your time and hope that you find our series helpful and supports your learning throughout this project. I'll turn it back over to my friend Darcy. Thanks.
Sorry, my mouse stopped working. Thank you so much, Max. That was awesome. So before we move on to our next speaker with ISeeChange, I just wanted to give you all a little bit of background about why we're doing this and what's happening. And Max kind of touched on those four main experiences of climate change: the drought, extreme precipitation, sea level rise, and extreme heat. So we got a grant through NOAA and the Museum of Science Boston, and we're doing citizen science in our communities to help facilitate building a resilient community against climate change. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Instead of focusing on all four of those, we chose to focus on extreme precipitation because of where we are. Sea level rise is a problem in our community, but the more direct problem that we experience regularly is actually extreme precipitation between hurricanes and flash flooding. And as most of you probably know, just driving around the city, when we get flash floods, or when it rains really hard, the drainage is not great. And so there are certain areas where we end up with flooding. So we're focusing on extreme precipitation, which is where the Rain Gauge project comes in. And then with ISeeChange, we're also going to focus on more of a rain slant to that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sam, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Hi, everybody. I am going to share my screen. Cool. Like Darcy said, I am Sam. I am sorry, I got to move the little bar with the humans so I can get to the present button. But I am the global community manager at ISeeChange. My colleague Claudia is here, was so generous to take some time out of her weekend. She is our Miami community manager. So if you have questions or need clarifications that are in Spanish, she can help us out with that. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about how you can document extreme precipitation on ISeeChange as part of this project, and also to help us select the location for our 5 new flood height sensors that we hope to place in the fall. So quick little intro to ISeeChange. We are a global community. People share their observations about climate change and weather around the world. We think that models and satellites do a great job of showing the big picture of climate change, but really it's only people like you and I on the ground who can talk about how it's impacting us and our neighborhoods and our communities. And, when it comes time to make decisions about the future of those communities, that local insight and the local perspective that only you have is really, really important, like Max said, because it can be so different block to block. And so for our project in Wilmington, we we are really, really excited to be working with a number of great people, including the Cape Fear Museum and the Museum of Life and Science in Durham. We're also working with a sensor company called Greenstream Technologies, who have created these flood height sensors that can sense flooding. They don't need to be above a body of water. They can see, like this one in Norfolk, Virginia, is on a street light above a road. And so it can tell, if the road is flooded or if it's passable or not. And so we got a grant with this company to select the location for 5 flood height sensors. They don't necessarily need to be in Wilmington proper. So, if you're outside of the city, definitely still participate, because we could put the sensors there. There's nothing restricting us to that per se. And the long-term plan is for them to be tied into the state's virtual network of flood sensors. So you could, go on it's called Feynman. I can put the link in the chat after this. But you could go on there and see, is this road flooded, or is this area where we put a sensor flooded, which we hope will, help you make decisions during storms in the future. So not only are you helping us to collect data and understand where it might be useful to get more information about where flooding is occurring, but also hopefully it helps you and make decisions about your life. So you can post about a lot of different things on ISeeChange. We're going to be talking about flooding, but we encourage you as well. Like if you're experiencing a heat wave, if you're experiencing a drought like y'all are now, if you're a gardener and you're seeing weird things happen in your garden, or if you're just seeing normal weather, post that too. Having baseline understandings of what's normal to compare the extreme to is also really useful. But I wanted to talk specifically and walk you through what it's like to create a flooding post. So you'll see the first 2 slides, or first 3 slides actually, start the same for any topic that you're posting about. You'll insert some text, a story about what you're experiencing. We find that the most useful posts tell us more than what we might be able to see on a weather app, or just a photo. Tell us, is it flooding and you can't get to school? Is it flooding and you're worried about property damage, you're worried about it getting into your house? Is this an area that floods all of the time? Is this, an unusual flood? Or if you don't see flooding somewhere where you would usually expect to, that's really useful and valuable information too. If you have photos, you can add them, but it's not required. The next step of posting is to verify your date and location. It's going to default to your current date and time, but you can change it. So, like Max said, y'all are in a drought, but if you have stories or examples or memories of flooding from past storms, you can post that. Just change the date, do your best estimating time. I don't expect you, if you're posting something from a hurricane a couple of years ago, I don't expect you to know exactly what time it occurred at, but just do your best. And then you can correct the street address if are, I think it'll default to the last place where you posted from. The first time you post, you'll have to input one itself, but make sure it's at the location where you are, where you observe the flooding that you're posting about, so that when we do make decisions about where to place those flood sensors, we know where to look and where to put them. Your location information will never be publicly shared. The closest we get is sharing just general neighborhood that a post is in on the public facing side. So, if you're concerned about privacy, hopefully that alleviates it some, but feel free to reach out and we can talk more about that. After you have confirmed your date and location, it will show you some topics that we think that your post is about. And this comes from the text part of your post. So you can add other ones if you feel like, actually there were animals and insects in this post and you didn't catch that. Or if there are ones that are tagged that are inaccurate, unselect those. That helps us, train the algorithms long term to identify what kinds of words are about what kinds of topics. But if you are posting about storms and flooding, make sure that it is selected, because that will take you to this next screen, which is where you can add critical details if you have them. It's optional, so you can skip it if you don't have any of this information. But for example, if you have a rain gauge, or if you know when the storm started or stopped, you can add those details in here, and that really helps us to understand what kind of rain intensity caused what kind of flooding that you might be seeing or not seeing. Because for example, if you get an inch of rain in an hour, that's going to lead to very different flooding than if you get an inch of rain in 24 hours. And so understanding the different nuances of storms can be useful, again, for people who are making decisions about resilience in the community. So that is how to create a post. I wanted to show y'all some examples of posts as well. As you can see, people post about a range of storms and flooding impacts, from very minor storms to this one in Miami was from a tropical storm. And you can really get a feel for what people are talking about. I think that this one in Jensen Beach, Florida is some stormwater collection ponds. So that's another example of a post of not just showing us, hey, it's flooding, but like, this is what the stormwater infrastructure looks like. Maybe it's doing its job, maybe it's not. And like Max said, as the built environment changes block to block, you're going to see changes in climate impact. So, if there is a change in your neighborhood, if they redo a road, or if they are doing some stormwater resilience projects, you can use ISeeChange posts to sort of like compare befores and afters of what flooding looks like in that area after these changes have been made. Maybe it gets better, maybe it gets worse, maybe it gets better for a little bit, and then it gets worse again. We saw that from some of our community members in Ocean City, New Jersey. But I encourage you to poke around on the sightings feed of ISeeChange. Specifically, you can filter it to look at communities like New Orleans or Miami or Ocean City, New Jersey, where we have had people documenting flooding for multiple years at that very like base community level, to sort of get a feel for what they're talking about and what they find useful to document. And if you ever are curious and want to get in touch with some of those community members, just let me know. But that's ISeeChange. I'll put some information about how to get to the website and how to contact me in the chat. But really the big takeaway is, no sighting is too small. Anything that you can share about climate change in general in your area, but specifically about storms and flooding, is really, really useful to us as we look towards trying to choose locations for those flood height sensors. And we are hoping to have them in place before the October king tide, in case they end up in an area that is influenced by tidal flooding. But of course, they don't have to be. If it's an area that is far from the beach, that is totally fine too. We're really wanting the community to drive and to tell us where it's going to be most useful to have these sensors placed. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you all on ISeeChange, and I'm grateful to be here with you guys today.
Thank you so much, Sam. Does anybody have any questions at this point for either Sam or Max or me, myself? Okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to Tim over the National Weather Service. He's going to talk to us about CoCoRaHS and what happens to the data once it's input.
That's right. I'm Tim Armstrong, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service here in Wilmington, and that's the focus of today's talk is going to be the CoCoRaHS program. So I'll go ahead and get that started here. Can everyone see a CoCoRaHS rain gauge on the screen? Okay, so here we go. CoCoRaHS is a sort of a tortured acronym, stands for Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, and CoCoRaHS is how that's spelled there. It's a volunteer network of over 20,000 folks around the United States, Canada, and now the Bahamas, who every morning will check their rain gauge and share the data they've collected to the CoCoRaHS website or through the app. And it enables the National Weather Service, it enables all sorts of government, academic, and private sector researchers to use the data to basically draw a complete map of what the last 24 hours rainfall and snow has looked like across the country. I chose a picture here from earlier back in January when a significant rain event was occurring across the Carolinas. And you can see hundreds and hundreds of little observations there across the Carolinas showing everyone's rain gauge where they checked it that morning and sent in their observations. The CoCoRaHS program is becoming incredibly valuable here to us at the National Weather Service, and I'll show some more details about that. For those who are participating in the program, you're going to be given a rain gauge, I understand. And this is not just your normal little $5 Walmart rain gauge you might see stuck in someone's backyard. This is a professional piece of equipment here. This is research quality equipment you'll be given. There's a large funnel at the top. It measures about 4 inches across. That catches a large amount of rainfall and funnels it down into the small inner collector gauge. And so by having a lot of rain falling into a small area, you can make a very accurate reading on exactly how much rain fell. that inner center gauge there can measure 1 inch of rainfall, and then it'll overflow into the outer or spillover gauge, which can then measure up to 11 inches of rainfall. So hopefully, unless we get another Hurricane Florence, you're not going to see that entire gauge fill up again there. But this is definitely a nice piece of equipment you're going to have there that you can make some excellent observations with. Now, once you have your rain gauge, the big question is, where do you put this thing? Obviously, the big thing is to get it away from obstacles. You don't want to put it near a house, near a building, near a tree, anything that would interfere with the natural accumulation of rain in the gauge there. In a perfect world, we'd love to see those rain gauges placed twice as far away from obstacles as those obstacles are high. So if you've got a 30-foot tree, we'd like to see it 60 feet away. I will say, like, that doesn't happen in a lot of cases. I don't have a yard large enough for that. So in my case, the gauge is going to have to, there's going to have to be some give and take here, finding a spot where it's open to the sky, where it can catch rain and still minimize the amount of blockage you're going to have from trees and buildings. In terms of where to actually attach the gauge, there are different options here about attaching it to a post, attaching it to a deck rail, for example, or just sitting it on a flat surface. I've seen people get excellent data just setting it on a sidewalk and maybe stack a few bricks around it if it's going to be a windy night to keep it from blowing over. But essentially open to the sky and in a location where it's easy for you to get to it and then check the gauge there is what we're looking for. So in terms of how to read these rain gauges, again, this is a precision piece of equipment here. You can make some very accurate observations all the way down to the 100th of an inch level. We'll start with the easiest observations and go to more complex scenarios, but historically, rain only falls about 1 out of every 3 days in Wilmington. So 2 out of every 3 days, just like this morning, every rain gauge in Wilmington read 0. So you're going to go out there and look at the rain gauge and see nothing in it. It's important to write down that 0, though. Don't just say, well, they're not interested in the fact I had no rain last night. 0 is a valid scientific observation. So reporting a 0 is just as important as reporting a 5-inch thunderstorm you had yesterday. So 0 will be the most common thing you report, and it is important to see those. Now, on some mornings when it's foggy, dew will collect. Obviously, we've seen dew on windshields. We've seen it dripping off the roofs and off trees sometimes. But dew is not considered to be precipitation. It doesn't fall from a cloud. Dew actually just condenses out of the moist, the humid air at night. And we do not count dew as precipitation. So if you see a little bit of water in your rain gauge after just a foggy night where there were no clouds, no rain or anything, still report that as a 0, even though you've got a little trace of water in there. The next method here, or the next thing you'll see is on a day where it does rain, but just for a short period of time, we call this a trace of rain. That's when there might only be 1 or 2 drops in your gauge, not enough to actually measure. It doesn't get up to that first black mark there that records 100th of an inch. In this case, we just call that a trace, and that's denoted by the letter T in your record there. That would just be a sprinkle of rain, maybe enough to wet the windshield, but certainly not enough to actually get anything wet outside. And that's what we call a trace of rain there. Those are important to report also. Now, most rainfall events are going to be between a trace and an inch. And so in that case, you're reading the rain gauge here, just counting the little black marks off the bottom. And each of these marks is 100th of an inch. You can think of it almost like counting pennies, where 1 inch will be $1. And so the gauge that you've got pictured on the screen there, you can count the black marks 1, 2, 3, and about 4. So you would record that as 0.04 inches or 400ths of an inch of rain. So that's going to be a normal rainfall. You might see, almost any time of the year, a small amount of rain there. Now, it does become more complex after a big thunderstorm. Let's say we've had a lot of rain overnight. You walk out to your gauge in the morning and you see something that looks like this. In this case here, that inner funnel, that narrow funnel in the center, or inner gauge rather, is filled all the way up to the top. That measures 1 inch of rain. So we've got an inch plus it overflowed, and now that outer gauge has some water in it also. So let's see how we deal with a situation like this. In Wilmington, looking back at history, you'll have about 20 of these events a year where we get about 1 inch of rain or more in a 24-hour period. So what you'll do, just like the gentleman is indicating here in the little picture, that inner middle tube measures 1 inch of rain. So you pick it up out of the gauge and pour it out, writing down 1 inch on your sheet. And then you'll take the outer gauge that has the other water in it, pour it back into that middle gauge there, and measure how much rain is in there. So in this case here, we've measured 1 inch that was in the center funnel or center cylinder to start with. The outer portion then had another, let's say 0.74 in there. You would add those two figures together to get 1.74 inches in this case here. Now, in a really, really significant rainfall event, say a major thunderstorm, a tropical system, or a hurricane, you may have to do this process several times. The highest rainfall we've seen here recently in a 24-hour period could be as much as 10 inches. So it could be taking the middle gauge out, recording 1 inch, and then refilling it a number of times to see exactly how much rain fell over the last 24 hours. We did have a lady during Hurricane Florence back in 2018 who recorded over 30 inches across a 4-day period. So she was out there, continuously, it seemed like, checking her rain gauge, writing down the numbers to come up with a total like that. But that's how you would measure a very, very large rainfall there. Now, when you start peering at that little center middle gauge there, you're going to notice that the water does not make a flat surface across it. It's actually slightly curved. And that's because the surface tension of the water actually tries to make it crawl up the sides of the container a little bit. We read from the bottom of that curve. That curve, the technical word is a meniscus. And you read from the bottom, the lowest part of that curve there. So in the little picture you've got on your screen there, you would not call that 0.41 inches, you would call it 0.40. It's right there, very close to that 0.40 line. So always read from the bottom of that curve when you're reading water out of your rain gauge. So what time of the day do you read the rain gauge? We like it to be about every 24 hours. 7 a.m. is preferable, but I know for a lot of folks, we have various schedules. My work schedule is chaotic sometimes. It's not possible for me to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So as long as you pick a time that you think works for you most days, whether it's 5 a.m., whether it's 8 p.m., whether it's midnight if you're a night owl, whatever time is, you think could work really well for you, as long as it's consistent, is a good time to read the gauge and report your data each day there. And something else I want to point out, don't feel guilty about taking vacations. Don't feel guilty about, oh, I've got to take my son to school today. I feel really bad. I'm sick today. I can't get out there. Life happens. It's very understandable. All the volunteer data we can get is great, but we're not going to come down on you like a sack of bricks if you miss, observations occasionally. But all the data we can get is wonderful. So we do appreciate the volunteer work that's done out there for us. Now, to actually sign up to be a CoCoRaHS observer, you've already got your rain gauge coming to you later this week, I understand. You'll go to the CoCoRaHS.org website and click on the new observer sign up there. You're going to see a form that looks like this come up on your screen. The most important pieces of information they're going to need are your name and your email and your address. The address will not be shared with anyone in the public. That is simply so they know where on the map to place your pin for where your observations are going to show up. You're going to need to indicate on the form also that you've already had training, which you're having right now, and that you already have the correct rain gauge. They want to make sure that everyone's using the exact same type of rain gauge because they want the readings to be consistent across the entire CoCoRaHS network. At the end of the sign-up process, you'll be given a login and password, and you'll be given a station ID that uniquely identifies your station so that when, say, WECT, WWAY, or us here at the National Weather Service are looking at your data, we know exactly where you're at. It'll say, for example, Wilmington 6 miles east, and that might be a location of a station that's reported some heavy rainfall. So a good way to know who's reporting the data is by that station identification there. So once you've gotten to this stage, you are now an official CoCoRaHS observer, and you're ready to start making some observations. So the way to do that is you're going to go out there, check that gauge. It's going to be 0 most days, but hopefully one of these days soon we'll get some rain in there and you'll be able to report it here. You have 2 options for how to report. You can do it through the CoCoRaHS website, and the interface is what you see there on the left. There's also an official CoCoRaHS app that runs on either iOS or Android devices. So you can download that for your phone, and it's a very easy way to get the information entered. You'll put in your username and password, and you'll see a screen that looks very much like this. It's going to ask you for the date of your observation, the time of your observation, and how much rain you measured. And again, 0 is a valid observation there. We like to see the zeros. And on the phone app, it's going to look a little bit different, but we'll ask you more or less the exact same questions. And you'll see 2 links I've got circled in red over on the extreme left there: daily precipitation and multi-day precipitation. Most days when you're recording your rain gauge data every day, you're going to click that daily precipitation link to enter just what happened the last 24 hours. Now, if you're gone on vacation for a weekend, you come back on a Monday morning and you've got an inch of rain in your rain gauge, we don't know if that fell all yesterday or if it was earlier in the weekend. So in that case, you'll enter it as a multi-day accumulation. And that just helps the CoCoRaHS system to understand you're putting in information there for what is probably more than a 24-hour period. So daily versus multi-day is an important distinction to make there for the CoCoRaHS information. When you're done, don't forget to hit that submit report button that's on both the app and in the website there. just to make sure your observation is actually transmitted to CoCoRaHS. Within about 5 minutes of you hitting submit, we get that here in our systems at work. We can look at your data, compare it to airports, compare it to other observations that come in from CoCoRaHS around the area, and see how you match up. And it helps us to get a much more complete understanding of what the weather's been doing, not just in the last 24 hours, but when we look at this in a historic climatological setting, it helps us to understand where the wet areas, where the dry areas are. We get to see climate change take place in real time here. So certainly a lot of excellent opportunities to advance science by helping to participate in this CoCoRaHS program. You can also, if you want to go back and look at your observations, they're all available on there. We have folks that have over 10 years of data in the system already, and they continue to add new information every day. If you put an observation in and you think later that day, oh, I don't think I read that right, I need to go back and change that. You can also, by clicking that list/edit my reports link on the CoCoRaHS page, you can go back in and change an observation if you know you messed up there. And that again gets updated in the database within just a few minutes. So how long is your commitment to CoCoRaHS should you start this program? Ideally, we'd like to see a few months of data, but the longer you can do this, the more valuable it becomes to us here at the Weather Service and to climatologists across the country who are tracking the accumulation of rainfall, who are tracking climate change and so forth. The longer you can put data in, the more valuable it is to everyone. So we'd appreciate, as long as you are interested in the program, thank you very much for that. So why is CoCoRaHS important to us? Well, I want to give just one anecdotal example for why it really saved us here at the Weather Service. For those who lived here in Wilmington back in 2018, we had a little visit by a hurricane named Florence there, one of the worst hurricanes ever to strike southeastern North Carolina in all of its recorded history, actually. The official rain gauge here at the airport actually lost power. We lost about 18 hours of the event. Luckily, we have a backup rain gauge that gives us data, but it was not the hourly data we're used to. But CoCoRaHS observers who are out there checking their rain gauge every day, sending in the information to us, really saved us in this case here, where if you look at all these reports that came in after Hurricane Florence, about half of these are from CoCoRaHS observers. And the top three, Elizabethtown, Wilmington, and Hampstead, are all CoCoRaHS observers. If it was not for the CoCoRaHS program, we would have no idea there were rainfall totals as high as 30 and 35 inches that actually fell during Hurricane Florence there. The utility of this program, not just to day-to-day meteorology like I'm doing, but to climatologists, to water resource managers, to emergency managers for cities and counties and states, cannot be understated. It's an excellent program. It's given us access to literally tens of thousands of observations we would not otherwise have access to. So in doing this, you're doing your community an excellent service, and we really appreciate all the CoCoRaHS observers who have been contributing for so long, and hopefully will contribute into the future as well. When you reach 100 rainfall observations, it's a little bit over a month or 3 months of data there. Your data will then be sent to the National Climatic Data Center up in Asheville as official data. The CoCoRaHS program, because of the training and the equipment you're using, actually fits the bill for quality scientific research. And so people literally hundreds of years from now can go back and look at your data and compare it to other rainfall records that were reported during storms across the area. So there's a very big historical aspect to this as well, where this actually becomes an official record of the Weather Service that people are able to look at for years and years to come. And I just want to share, going way back into like the 80s and 90s, when I was a very interested school kid in meteorology, but there were no such things as CoCoRaHS or even really the internet as it is today, I would keep these weather records at home. I've got a little scan there of what things I would write down at home, but that was just what I had at home. I couldn't share that with anyone outside of my family. So the fact that you today here in 2021 can set a rain gauge out, record the data, and literally share it with the world and have it become an official record that people could be using hundreds of years from now, I think it's pretty amazing, and certainly would make you feel good about the work and the volunteer work you're able to do here. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I know there's a lot of information there. I know questions are going to come up the first time you have a big rainfall event, or maybe questions about where the best place to set your gauge is. Please contact me. I've got my email address and the office phone number there. Or if you go to the CoCoRaHS.org website, there's a lot of very good information, training videos, reference information there about how to read the rain gauge data, how to input it onto the website, and they're very helpful there as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
we'll go ahead and send out the training slides from the CoCoRaHS website for everyone as well, so you'll have those as a reference. And like Tim said, if you have further questions, you can reach out to him. We'll send everyone's contact information as well. So if anybody has any questions or follow up to all of this information, you can get that information later on. So if nobody has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Before we say goodbye, I actually wanted to let y'all know about a national forum that's happening to talk about extreme precipitation. So that's actually occurring on July 14th. It's from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And again, we'll send all of this out in a follow-up email, so you don't have to write it down right now or remember it. But this is going to be a virtual program where essentially you guys will get to be in the position of making the climate decisions for our region. So we'll walk through some simulations about extreme precipitation and possible avenues that we could take as citizens to address these extreme precipitation issues in the area. And then we'll get to make those decisions and then see what happens as a result of the city decisions that we've made. So it's a really cool simulation. It's really fun. It's all virtual, so you can just join at any time, or you can join from anywhere. And that's on July 14th. And this is also part of the grant as well. So we're hopeful that after having participated in all of this data collection, that it'll be a really interesting way to kind of understand what your data has contributed to, and then talk about that as a community and how we can proceed in terms of making policy decisions on that front. So we'll send all this information as a follow-up, and we'll send out the recording of this as well, so you can have that for reference if you're interested. And if anybody has any questions, you can ask them now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up and call it good. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. Feel free to reach out at any time if you have any questions later on.
Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you all.